pants and boots and 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 pants and boots.
Serious trauma detected.
Alright, agents. Hope everybody's doing well. As everybody's probably seen, there's a new build going around, kind of the PvE meta, and it's all based around the Eclipse protocol gear set. So I'm going to get into a build variation that I have actually not seen. I've been working on getting my Shepherd rank up, and I've seen a lot of variations of this. Almost every group I run in, there's somebody else running a variation. But what I have not seen is anybody running the build around, and I don't see many people using this at all, the shock trap. And I decided to see what I can do about getting a shock trap build that really works. So what is the shock trap? Basically what this guy does, you throw this up, the shock trap scatters a minefield of small devices capable of shocking targets moving in their proximity. The cooldown reduces when the trap expires, and when I have the main build of this, the cooldown is less than the duration of the traps. When there is a slight delay, you can't just throw up a new set. The traps you have out have to explode, then there's a 1 second cooldown anyway, and then you can throw the new set of traps. For all these builds, we're going to be running with the Stinger Hive to apply a bleed. The damages change depending on the loadout, but the basic, what it comes down to is every one of these will have 18 charges, and the damage for the bleed will be anywhere between 55 and 60,000 as the base damage, depending on the build setup. So not too much variation there. Numbers end up being fairly consistent across the board as far as testing goes. So next, what we got to do is talk about this new gear set. Eclipse Protocol. 2-piece gives you plus 15% status effects, so that of course helps with the 4-piece bonus. The 3-piece is just kind of there. 15% skill haste, of course that helps a little bit, and 30% hazard protection. That does help, as the traps, you'll have to pay attention. When you put out the traps, certain traps will be red. Those traps can actually shock you. So some of your traps won't shock you, some of them will. You just got to be on the lookout, make sure you don't go near a red trap. If you do and you get shocked, of course this hazard protection will help you get out of that a bit quicker. The big thing we're looking for is the 4-piece, indirect transmission. Your status effects now spread on kill to all enemies within 15 meters and refresh 50% of the duration. So the more duration you have, or in other words, the more status effects you have as the attributes, or from the brand set bonus, the gear set bonus, whatnot, the longer that duration is going to be, and thus the more refresh you get from that 50%. Now, these all are, the core attribute is a skill tier. These are all based around skill tiers. Attributes, I've been messing around with mixing status effects and skill damage. Ultimately, it turned out that for this build, it seems like just running status effect across the board is more efficient. You end up doing more overall damage. When you spec into skill damage, things like my Hive, the initial hit does more damage, but it doesn't do anything for the actual bleed. So, something to keep in mind. Now let's go over the 2 talents that you get in this gear set. The first one comes from the chest piece, which is Proliferation. Increases indirect transmission range from 15 meters to 20 meters and refresh percentage from 50% to 75%. So that's 50 to 75% that's a pretty big increase. I mean, that's kicking the amount of the duration of the bleed, the duration of the shock, all those up by quite a bit every time we get a kill, and spreads it around. The other thing to note is that 15 meter to 20 meter range. So that's 33% more area that we're covering. So, or that we're spreading that those status effects around to. So I definitely believe the proliferation is worth taking a look at when considering giving up a high-end chest talent. Now the backpack talent, Symptom Aggravator, amplifies all damage you deal to status-affected targets by 15%. So this, similar to Glass Cannon, this is a multiplier. So this takes all the damage that you do to status-affected enemies, whether you're shooting them, whether it's a status effect, whether it's a skill, no matter what you're doing, you're getting a 15% multiplier to your damage with this talent. Now, while this is a large bonus, I personally believe there is a better talent available in the high ends, but I'm going to go through all the different combinations that I tried, and really you guys have to make the decision for yourself based on your guys' gameplay and how you like to play. As far as the specialization, I am personally running with the Technician. There's an argument to be made for running the Firewall to get the 50% extra burn damage. I believe they lowered it to 20% burn duration instead of 50%, but even at 20%, that's still pretty good. And some other perks there. However, I personally like running with the Technician, if for no other reason, for the Faraday field, so I don't get disrupted. The number one way that I die is by not having my skills available for whatever reason, whether them being on cooldown or me being disrupted, not being able to use them, being shocked, not being able to use them. I'd say a good 80+% of the time I die is because I did not have access to one of my skills that would have been available to save my ass. It also gives you the benefit if you want to run one piece instead of skill tier to run some armor or some weapon damage on it. You do have that benefit. But really, you can run whichever the specializations you want for this. You're really not limited to the specialization. But now let's go ahead and talk about brand sets. We talked about the gear set. There's only two real options that I could see. For the most part, you would run either one brand set and an exotic, either the Imperial Dynasty or the BTSU gloves. Or you would run two high ends, and most of the two high end builds just are not worth running, as you'll see. But let's go over the different gear sets that you could use. And the number one, if you're going to use one, would be Golan, because that'll give you an extra 10% status effects. So I highly recommend, if you're just going to be running a single piece, to run that. However, I do see a lot of people, in fact, pretty much everybody I see running the Eclipse protocol is running a Wyvern one piece for the skill damage, and I don't know if I really feel like that's worth it. I get the diminishing returns, but I figure I just want to have the duration last as long as possible so I can make sure to get a kill, to refresh it to 75%, spread it to all the enemies again, and then start working on the next kill. So I still think Golan is better than Wyvern. Do realize that if you run Wyvern and you're running two high ends without an exotic, that you do get the 10% skill damage and the 10% status effect. So that would be the one area where if you're running two high ends, then I would run Wyvern over the Golan. But if I'm just going to be running a single high end and an exotic, I will definitely run the Golan for that plus 10% status effects over the skill damage. Other options you have, you could go with Murakami for the skill duration. Quickly, we'll talk about exotics that you can use. Different exotics that work well with a status effect build. First is the Imperial Dynasty holster. This guy comes with skill tier as the core attribute. It will always come with status effects and hazard protection, which do synergize very well with this build in any of its iterations. And the talent is beautiful. They just recently nerfed it, so you have to be in line of sight of the enemy, but it still functions great. Dragon's Glare. While in combat, applies burn to the enemy closest to you within 20 meters, cooldown of 35 seconds. Another exotic you could use would be the BTSU gloves. This would benefit the Hive and your team. If you're running in a team, there's a good argument for this. It comes with core attribute of skill tier. It always comes with skill haste and repair skills. Repair skills does not help us in this build. However, the talent, Transference Overclock, grants 15% Hive skill haste per skill tier. We're going to be at 90% skill haste all the time. Detonating Hive refreshes the skill cooldowns and grounds overcharge for 15 seconds. If it's skill tier 6, this also applies to all allies. Alright, so since we're at skill tier 6, this will benefit all of our allies, kicking them to skill tier 6. And in addition, it resets all of their skills. So, allies receiving this benefit are unable to receive benefit from it again for 120 seconds. Something to note, say you're in a group and say you have a Costas go bag. You could use your Costas. That would overcharge you for 15 seconds. Then you could get a kill with Future Perfect, which would give you overcharge for another 15 seconds. And then at the end of that, say somebody blew up their Hive to overcharge and reset the skills of all the allies, then you would have another overcharge for another 15 seconds. So you theoretically at this point, and there may be another overcharge I'm unaware of, but at this point, theoretically, you could have 45 seconds of consecutive overcharge time if you have a synergized team that plays that right. So just food for thought. And this, of course, is highly beneficial when using the Hive. Now, one option to keep in mind, you guys could run with the Acosta's Go Bag. It gives skill haste, skill damage, and allows you to overcharge and gives a whole bunch of bonuses. It does give the 10% status effects, 25% ammo capacity, 3 extra grenades, and an armor kit. So, you could run Acosta's. Now, the one other exotic that I would consider using is a weapon, and that is the Pestilence light machine gun. And it's for the Plague of Outcast. Hits apply a debuff, dealing 100% weapon damage over 10 seconds. This stacks up to 50 times. Now, one thing to note is this is not a status effect. This is a debuff. So this does not pertain, any of the rules that we're working with stat effects do not apply to this. However, when an enemy dies with this debuff, all stacks are transferred to a nearby enemy within 25 meters. And one thing to note is when they die and that transfers over, it refreshes that 10 seconds. So say you kill an enemy with 1 second left on their timer, they will immediately, the next enemy receiving that will be at the full 10 seconds. So you can transfer over, find that enemy, and start restacking. Alright, next we'll talk about weapons and talents that you could use that synergize well with status effect builds. Now, one of the main perks you could use would be Perpetuation. Headshots grant 50% status effect damage and duration to the next status effect you apply with a 20-second cooldown, which is fairly short. This is a great perk for single target. The downside is only the first target, the main target you hit, gets that bonus damage and duration, and the guys around them seems like it's just normal. So this is good against single target, but I personally feel like there are better talents that you could use. This, of course, is an older talent, so it's just basically outshined is all. Now, you could use something like Spike or Perfect Spike. However, we are not looking to really amplify our skill damage because amplifying skill damage does nothing for the actual status effects. Now, Future Perfect, or in this case, in the case of the mechanical animal, Future Perfection, this is a great perk that synergizes very well. Weapon kills grant +1 skill tier for 19 seconds, or 15 seconds in the case of the normal version. And it stacks up to 3 times. Since we are at skill tier 6, that means we are automatically going to enact the next part. Weapon kills at skill tier 6 grant overcharge for 15 seconds. So, the cool thing about this is an enemy that's almost dead, you can whip this weapon out, kill them, and this will kick off that overcharge for 15 seconds, and you can switch weapons back. So, food for thought. And what I'm doing, just to point it out, my backup boomstick that I've run Preservation on all the way up until yesterday, I've now re-rolled for Future Perfect. So what I can do now is, if I have an enemy that's almost dead, I can just whip over to this bad boy, and with the extra damage that this thing does, I have no problems just taking down super fast, proccing Future Perfect, and then I switch right back over to my main weapons and start dealing damage again. So Future Perfect and Future Perfection are great perks. Another great perk that synergizes very well with this build is In Sync. Hitting an enemy grants 15% skill damage for 5 seconds. When using a skill or damaging an enemy with a skill grants 15% weapon damage for 5 seconds. And damage increases are doubled while both buffs are active at the same time. This is great because the Hive and the Bleed, as they bleed, that keeps refreshing the skill damage. So that keeps your weapon damage up. If you keep shooting at things, that will keep the skill damage up. The downside is, as I've alluded to previously, that skill damage only affects the actual damage the Hive does when it initially hits. So while the Hive will effectively keep your weapon damage up, the weapon damage does very little overall to buff the damage of the status effects. Now next, I'm going to be using the Carnage for Perfect Sadist. But depending on what skills you run, any of the skills that do bonus weapon damage to enemies with status effects can work to great effect with your build if you use a weapon that has the talent with the status effect that you have applied to the enemies the most often. That way you'll get the most out of it. And the last weapon talent that we're going to be covering is Vindictive, or in the case of the Grudge Submachine Gun, Perfect Vindictive. And this is a beautiful talent, particularly in a team with this build. Killing an enemy with a status effect applied grants you and all allies within 20 meters 18% crit hit chance and 18% crit hit damage for 20 seconds. And this also, once you proc this, you can switch weapons right back, and that lasts the full 20 seconds for everybody, regardless of the weapon you have in your hand. So the same that I was talking about Future Perfect, the same applies with this, but this is even better because this gives the entire group a damage bonus. So there are a lot of good weapon talents that can be used with this build to high effect. You just got to figure out which one works best for your different play style. As I go through the different builds, you guys will see the different weapons that I chose to use with the different talents for the different setups. But ultimately, it stayed pretty consistent for me across the board, and I do have a favorite build that I do believe works the best, which we'll get into after showing all the runners up. All right, now let's talk about adding in some high-end pieces, what we could do before we get into the builds. So for the chest, other than using the actual Eclipse Protocol chest piece, we could run Glass Cannon. All damage you deal is amplified by 25%. All damage you take is amplified by 50%. The pros, you do 25% more damage with everything. Ultimately, you can get the most extra damage out of it using this if you want to see high numbers. But it's still not the best talent overall based on the synergy of what this build does. Next, a very interesting talent is Trauma. Applies blind to an enemy hit in the head with a cooldown of 30 seconds. Applies bleed to an enemy hit in the chest with a cooldown of 30 seconds. These are both on independent cooldowns. And this can, of course, be used in this build and works with the indirect transmission. Your status effects, when they spread, you can spread both blind and bleed to everybody. For my testing, there's only 3 real viable chest choices. The Eclipse Protocol chest piece, of course, for its Proliferation perk. Trauma for its ability to apply blind and bleed to targets. Or Glass Cannon simply for the 25% multiplicative damage it does across the board ubiquitously. Now let's talk about the backpack talents. There are a few other options that you can run with the backpack talent depending on the build you want to run. Of course, we have the Eclipse Protocol Symptom Aggravator, which amplifies our damage by 15% to every enemy affected by status effects. You could use Wicked if you wanted to do more weapon damage. Applying a status effect increases total weapon damage by 18% for 20 seconds. So one thing to note, you guys can always go with the good Anarchist Cookbook. If you want to go with the golden piece, gives the status effects, so that synergizes great. You get one with status effects on it, and comes with Perfectly Wicked. Applying a status effect increases total weapon damage by 18% for 27 seconds. Creeping Death, this is a great one. When you apply a status effect, it also applies to all enemies within 8 meters of your target. Cooldown of 15 seconds. So it's a very short cooldown. And the cool thing about this is, this means you can run up on a group and use Creeping Death to instantly apply status effects to everybody within 8 meters of the first target. So that gets everybody going. And then as soon as you kill a target, that will proc the indirect transmission, which will then spread it. So this is basically a lightweight version of indirect transmission to start the party, get the party started early. So great perk right there. Combine Arms works okay with this. I mean, again, it doesn't do anything for the status effect damage, only the initial damage of the skills. You get some perfect Combined Arms with the Force Multiplier if you want to get some extra skill haste in there. Perfectly Combined Arms, shooting an enemy increases total skill damage. You could go with Strategic Alignment if you wanted to go with the China Light and get Perfect Shock and Awe. Applying a status effect to an enemy increases total skill damage and repair by 20% for 27 seconds. Or I believe you can go with the standard version of Shock and Awe if you wanted to go on a golden piece, which would give you the 20% for 20 seconds. However, that is just skill damage and does nothing for the bleed or status effects. Another quick thing to note is I did play around with the Firm Handshake. And while the 15% status effects seems like it would be a good idea there, you got to keep in mind that we give up a high-end piece. And since you could use a Golan, which would have 10% status effect as a brand set, and you could get up to 10% as an attribute, that's you're taking 15% status effects here and giving up a possible 20% status effect on a Golan piece. It makes no sense. It doesn't make any sense at all. So every iteration that I tried using the Firm Handshake, they needed to make it. I think the Firm Handshake needs to be a Golan glove. If they made it a Golan glove, or here's what, make it a Wyvern. That way you have to use 2 pieces of Wyvern, but then that second piece gives you the status effect and the first piece gives you the skill damage. That would be beautiful too. Change the Firm Handshake to Wyvern gear set. Alright, so now I'm going to try to cover all the different variations I tried out and try to show a little bit of the damage numbers and just see how the overall gameplay. Almost all these things I was getting my Shepherd rank up. I just joined random people just to see how it works actually in a group in the real world. Status effects is really hard to test here in the range, so it really took some actual gameplay to see. So I'll show you the different build combinations, and then right afterwards you'll get to see some live gameplay of it happening. Alright guys, so the first one I did that I tried was to go with a BTSU gloves and this Golan piece, but it wasn't Glass Cannon. Glass Cannon, just not worth it for a myriad of reasons. Try it out yourself. What I did was I had Trauma on it, so I applied the blind and the bleed. So I'm going to blow these up immediately too. You gotta watch out for those red rotators. Now the problem I found with this was that the blind and the bleed, Trauma and Creeping Death is probably the best combo of high-end gear combos. And really, Trauma does not work properly without that. So what I found is this combination just didn't really work very well at all. BTSU gloves do nothing to refresh the cooldown of Trauma, so just really wasn't worth it. Now the other thing I tried with the BTSU gloves was to use the chest piece with Proliferation, and then we used the Creeping Death. Dude, come on, dudes.
Serious.
Dude. Oh, get the fuck out of here, dude. Now this actually worked quite a bit better. It allowed me to spread the status effects around. It meant that I could go up and immediately drop the hive, and that would spread around to everybody. But it still wasn't very effective. It didn't really give me an easy way of spreading the status effects other than just creeping up on the enemies to get the hive on them. I mean, I could try to throw the shock trap, but yeah, it just wasn't a lot of fun. I guess that's what it comes down to. I want to have fun playing. Now, the next thing I tried to do was to use the 4-piece EP setup, using the two high-end talents that worked really good together. Trauma and Creeping Death. And this actually worked pretty good. This was a lot of fun.
The last of them. Take them down, Agent.
System malfunctioning. System back online. System curtailed. System reactivated. Agent down.
So there's two different combinations I used with the 4-piece EP. We did Glass Cannon on the chest and the Creeping Death.
Civilians in danger.
Let's see about this. Now we're just going to come down here. Watch this. I want to see some damage numbers. Where are the damage numbers at? There we go. Oh, dude, look at that. 83,000 bleed. This was alright, but it didn't feel as powerful or as much fun as it should feel like, and I was a lot squishier than I wanted to be. However, simply switching over to Trauma so that we could roll up and immediately get blind on everybody or bleed on everybody, this combo was significantly more fun to play. Is it the best combo? No. But if you don't have the exotics, this is a great way to go. Another thing to note is you could also, you don't have to run the GL piece. You could run 2 Wyverns, because if you were to have that second Wyvern, you notice you would get the 10% status effects. So don't feel obligated to run GL. You can run 1 GL and a Wyvern, or you can run 2 Wyverns if you want to maximize this. Now there's 3 different versions of what I consider to be the best sort of build, and all of them are centered around one particular piece, and that's the Imperial Dynasty. This Dragon's Glare is a game changer. A, you can use it to initiate a fight, initiate a battle by running up and immediately setting enemies on fire. And B, it works as a self-defense mechanism. There's been plenty of times when I've had an enemy creeping up from behind, I'm in the middle of battle, I don't realize it, and all of a sudden I hear screaming behind me, I turn around and there's an enemy on fire that otherwise would have killed me. So, the Imperial Dynasty is I highly recommend, plus its status effect is one of the main attributes. Alright, so probably my least favorite of the 3 variations of the what I'm calling the imp protocol is to use the Golan for the 10% status effects and go glass cannon. Again, you do multiplicative damage. However, you are a lot squishier. The cool thing is glass cannon does synergize well with Symptom Aggravator, which these are both multiplicatives and multiply off of each other. So if you just care about big damage numbers, this is how you can get some big damage numbers. Now, overall, does it do as much damage? No, but you get big damage numbers. All right, now the second best version of this build that I found so far that I enjoy playing with is to run with the Imperial Dynasty holster, to run with a golden chest piece with trauma on it. Now you would want status effect on there instead of skill damage if you can get it. And then our Symptom Aggravator. And this is a lot of fun because you do apply status effects quite often.
What the hell is going on here? Put these fuckers down! No more time.
But this, I think, is the build right here. This is the one that I've had the most success with. I'll quickly go over this. We're running the Pestilence for the Plague of Outcasts to apply this, and this will keep transferring every time I get a kill. It procs the Proliferation. It will also move the Plague of Outcasts around. Running with Perfect Vindictive so I can whip this out for kill if I want to buff the damage of my team. And if I just want to buff my own damage a little bit, I can whip out the backup boomstick for the Future Perfect to get an overcharge rocking. Of course, we're running 4-piece Eclipse protocol. We're running the chest piece for the additional range to the indirect transmission and the 75% refresh. We're running an Imperial Dynasty for the Dragon's Glare. And we are running with the Creeping Death Golan backpack in order to spread all of our status effects around right out the gate. This is given the most overall damage. Just to check out, we got status effect as the attribute. We got status effect, a little bit of status effect. This I'm looking and hoping for a better status effect. And status effect. One thing to note that I do love, that armor regen. This is a saving grace right here. In this iteration, we got a Stinger Hive that has a bleed of 60,000 as the base. Anyway, let's get the gameplay, and then I'll see you guys when we're done with that. Look what you can do on heroic with all these dudes here like this, right? It's like Wait, did it automatically cause my shit to blow up? What the fuck is that, guys? That was some weird, weak shit. That's like a bunch of the problems with the skills, though, where it's like, dude, alright. It could work fucking fine, but then it just doesn't. Okay, don't fucking just blow up everywhere, guys. There we go. Now it's working right.
Good work. Go on and head back up. The team from the campus has taken position inside the memorial.
Alright, agents, as you guys can see, this most likely will get some sort of Nerf gun attack done on it. We'll just have to wait and see. Have some fun with it while you can. The shock traps, they're surprisingly effective. I don't know if that's solely due to the Eclipse protocol. I've never tried using them in any other build. I might, but yeah, this build is in a very powerful spot right now, so I recommend checking it out. Of course, if you guys are playing the seasons, you get this as rewards as you play through it, and you even get the blueprints for it. So it's very easy to craft this. Just throw together the build. The hardest part probably is to farm up the Imperial Dynasty holster, and that's not even that hard. So if you guys like this video, do me a favor, slap that like button down there. If I haven't earned your subscription yet, hopefully this video has earned that. The best thing you can do to help me is to share the video. And if you'd actually like to support my work, please check out my subscribe star. It's linked down below. Thanks a lot, agents. I'll see you guys in the Dark Zone. Boots and pants and 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 boots and pants. What's up, guys? I just want to take a quick second to say thank you. I appreciate all the support I've been getting. If you guys feel like supporting my work, check out the subscribe star link down below. Lets me bring more content to you guys. You guys take it easy. Be safe out there.